everybody, and welcome to the session. I sincerely hope we appear to be running. If you can hear me, let me know you can hear me, and I will continue. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of babble on. Hello. Anyway, what we're going to talk about for the next hour? Well, this is a kind of intriguing one that Dawn threw my way, or maybe I threw it Dawn's way. I can't really remember. It all seems a very, very long time ago. But it kind of suddenly struck me that we're very good at being very forensic and talking about barley. I'm going to do a session later this afternoon at 4 o'clock looking much deeper about distillers becoming farmers and barley varieties, etc. So we're very good at talking about that and understand how barley may have an impact on flavour and how that could be part of this mysterious thing that might be called terroir or might not. Again, plenty of classes coming up on those topics. We're good at talking about the process and understanding where flavours come from all the way through the whisky making process in the distillery. We understand about wood. We understand about the different impact of American oak casks, of European oak casks, of refill casks. Just finished a session with Dawn there on the impact of fortified wine casks in general on whisky. So we're good at kind of picking up all these areas, like this kind of jigsaw piece that you have to put together to try and understand a whisky's character, its distinctiveness, its distillery character, its DNA, fingerprint, call it whatever you want. So we get thinking about that and talking about that and believing we're at a level of understanding about all these different elements that exist within a whisky's flavour. But one thing that I think hasn't necessarily been talked about as part of this overall character, let's try and avoid the terroir word, this overall individuality of a whisky is the impact of climate. The impact of climate on flavour and how heat, how humidity, how air pressure, how altitude, how all of these natural factors will actually have an impact on flavour itself. So over the next hour or so, no, actually hour, because I've got classes coming out of my ears today, we're going to have a look at 6 spirits, 5 whiskies, 1 rum, and ask that question. And I have asked the distillers in question exactly about the conditions that they are aging, maturing their whiskies and indeed rum in, and the answers have been absolutely fascinating. So I'll be reading out a whole screed of data about all these particular different distilleries and the climatic conditions that the whisky is maturing in as we taste our way through. Hopefully a few of you, if not all of you, have got the packs. If not, there's going to be, fingers crossed, some interesting elements coming up as well. So, and hello, Luke G. There we are. So I thought we would actually kick off in Scotland. Because we're kind of moving from cool climate to pretty ferociously warm climate in this. So it kind of made sense to start off in the coolness of the Highlands and the coolness of Ballinadaloch, in fact, in the lee of Ben Rinnes with Glenfarclas. So starting off with Glenfarclas, the Glenfarclas 15-year-old, 46%. A whisky lovers and some patients as well. They do make phenomenal up the Grant family. So just going to dive straight in to the whisky and then kind of pull back and actually talk about the conditions and what impact the climate and what impact the weather will have had on this Glenfarclas 15-year-old. So what has happened over the 15 years? As you can see, a lovely golden colour, kind of deep golden colour. On the nose, some kind of nutty elements coming in. Little hints of kind of dry head. I often get this smell in Glenfarclas, and it's one I pick up on the 15-year-old. And this, I apologise for people who are not maybe from Scotland. I apologise to you because you're not from Scotland, but I apologise because of the aroma that I'm going to describe. If you are in the hills and you happen to be lying face down in the heather for whatever reason, there's this wonderful kind of slightly kind of honeyed, dusty smell that you get actually within the heather itself. And that's what I pick up here. That's that kind of slight kind of dusty, nutty, slightly honeyed character coming through on the Farclas. It's got good weight to it. And a slight kind of green edge, just a little tiny kind of green that's coming through here. Does it taste like fig? Does it smell really super mature at 15? No. It still smells really quite vibrant, quite alive, quite energetic. You know, that a younger whiskey would be trying. But even that term age and youth is not necessarily perhaps a completely accurate way to look at it, because what you have to look at rather than age is actually levels of maturity. If you put a new make spirit into a multiple refill cask, it's going to take longer to hit the start of its maturity than if you're putting it into a first fill cask. And also the type of cask is going to have an impact. But anyway, let's have a little taste of this Glenfarclas before we get into the climate and how that perhaps is impacted on it. Succulent, rich, really good weight. Remember, Farclas still uses direct fire. That always adds that little bit of weight to it, almost kind of brassy effect that comes through. That honeyed quality is there, that richness, that dried fruit just coming through on the edge. A really, really big, complex whiskey. I love it to bits. Going to add a little drop of water to this because sherry casks have been involved in here, and as we found out just 15 minutes or so ago, sherry casks and water aren't necessarily the best of friends. This just allows some of the top notes to come through, more of that kind of heather blossom now. I've got up from my prone position on the moor. It does need that little drop of water for me, personally. Entirely up to you how you want to drink it. Because I think it just kind of smooths it off. It stops it nipping a little bit on the sides. It just kind of it adds a little bit of the oak, but adds much more of that kind of luxurious softness. And you can see where that whiskey is on its scale of maturation. You know, it's starting out on its mature journey. There's still some youth in there, which is refill cask, conceivably, but it's not actually super mature. So it's in a beautiful, beautiful position. Why might that be the case, though, my friends? Why is that the case? Because think about the climate. Think about the conditions that exist within the Glenfarclas maturation warehouses. What is happening when you put whiskey into a cask, or put new make into the cask? It's going to start breathing. The spirit is going to be entering into the cask, and it's going to be extracting elements of flavour from the woods, whether that's American oak, whether that's European oak, whether that's refill, what it's been filled with before, etc., etc. And that is slowly going to be coming into the whiskey, and it's going to be integrated into the whiskey over time. We're going to go into this in a bit more detail as we begin to work our way through these, because there's three very important elements that happen during maturation. So I'm going to hold fire on going into any more detail on that at the moment. All you need to know at this stage is the whiskey's in the cask, and it's beginning to extract elements from the wood itself, and the flavours are coming into the whiskey. At the same time the cask is breathing, we always tend to forget the importance of oxygen and oxidation on a whiskey over a long period of time. And it's very fascinating for me, going slightly off-piste here, if you're looking at whiskies which have been aged for maybe 25 years, 30 years in refill casks, there's very little influence from the wood itself. The wood is, if not absolutely completely neutral, but actually has less of an impact, a much lower impact flavour-wise. Air and oxygen is actually helping to generate flavour within the whiskey. So that oxidative element, the air, is really, really important. The whiskey has to breathe. The cask has to breathe. A distiller, who shall be named Diageo, did a very interesting experiment, a very valid experiment, because accountants don't like the fact that casks breathe, because when casks breathe, the alcohol evaporates off. So you're losing a vast amount of money every year, up to those angels. So what happens if could you wrap a cask? Would it still mature if you actually put cling film, effectively, around the cask? It doesn't work. You have to have that impact, influence of air coming in. And the angels are taking every year. In Scotland, the regulation, everybody says, well, it's 2% a year. That's kind of established by Customs and Excise. That is essentially the average that exists all across Scotland. So the Customs you will be able to claim 2% losses in terms of volume from your casks in Scotland every year. But your warehouse conditions are also going to impact on that as well. And the old style dunnage warehouses, which are used at Glenfarclas, which are thick stone walls, earthen floors, the ones that all old whiskey makers go, God, it just gives the best style of whiskey. You know, decent levels of humidity in there as well, quite a stable temperature in there. They will have a different impact. They will actually mature in a slightly way than in metal-sided warehouse if you're palletizing up to the ceiling, because the higher the higher the warehouse, the more heat is actually going to be generated, and the hotter it's going to be getting up at the top. So you will find a slightly different maturation regime of this exactly the same whiskey in a palletized warehouse or a rack warehouse compared to a dunnage warehouse where the casks are only 2 or 3 high. And the evaporation rate at Glenfarclas is different to the rest of Scotland. That's something that George told me ages ago. What is the average temperature in Dufton of a year? This is the average temperature, and in winter, 2 to 3 degrees centigrade in winter. So nice and fresh. In the summer, baking, 14 degrees. Obviously, it does reach perhaps the low 20s on occasion, but that's kind of the average. It's a pretty cool place in every sense of the word. Because of that, there's little energy within the maturation cycle. It's a slow and even and gentle maturation that takes place. It takes longer to hit that peak of maturity within those sorts of conditions. In fact, Glenfarclas estimate that they only lose 1% to the angels every year rather than the average 2%. So it takes longer. And that's one reason it's such a phenomenal whiskey that ages so well. Larger casks, which are going to take longer anyway because of the surface to volume ratio within that, but also because of the climate, also because of the conditions within the warehouse and the effect of the climate itself. It's slowing everything down. And opposite of that, and we're not actually tasting a bourbon this time, but it's fascinating to see and to think about what happens in America, in Kentucky, where the conditions are very different. Hot summers and very dry winters, hot humid summers, or a dry heat rather, hot summers and cold winters. But because you're only allowed to use brand new casks by law, what happens with maturation in Kentucky, and I think Buffalo Trace is a fantastic example of this, is a real attention to detail and understanding of how barrels mature and how flavors develop on different floors of a warehouse, especially if it's metal-sided. Up at the top, it's going to be as hot as hell. You're going to get a different flavor up there after 3-4 years than you are in the middle of that warehouse and at the bottom floor of the warehouse. Where the orientation is, where the sun is hitting, you're going to get a different flavor. And then a brick warehouse is going to behave in a different way again. So by understanding that kind of matrix of temperatures and climatic conditions, that directly influences the length of time and the flavor and the blending regime of a bourbon distillery such as Buffalo Trace. So it's a fascinating way of starting thinking about that. It's not just the wood, it's the impact of the climate on the wood. We're going to go to the Antipodes next. So we're heading down to New Zealand. A big fan of New Zealand. I was stranded in New Zealand for 7 weeks earlier on this year, and came back with my family eventually from our slightly enforced sojourn there, and wondered why the hell we didn't actually just stay there, because they have dealt with COVID a hell of a lot better than we have. They're an island, therefore they closed their borders. Oh, if only Britain was an island. Oh, hang on a minute. Okay, so we're going down into the South Island. We're going down to Otago, to Cardrona. Cardrona, a relatively new distillery. I first visited it 3 years ago. 3 years ago? This year? Yeah, 3 years ago. Wonderful, wonderful distillery in the Cardrona Valley, which is ski resort. So the snowfields there is relatively high up. So it's, the distillery sits at 600 meters above sea level. So you know, relatively high. Beautiful distillery. It's got a column still. It's got for-sized pots, and it makes, I think, an absolutely divine whiskey. This is their Just Hatched, which came out relatively. This came out this summer, 64.4. So those of you with the packs, be aware, check that bottle. It is not a weak whiskey, but it's a beautifully, beautifully balanced whiskey. Big fan of that. Again, that kind of honeyed quality coming through, real freshness, a floral element coming in, a little bit of heat. I'm going to add some water to it. It does like some water, but I'm going to take a little sip. It's too tempting not to. Luscious feel, beautiful, rounded, that honeyed quality coming through again. Added the water to it, a little whisper of it's not even barley, it's almost kind of dry grassy thing coming through in there. Slight hints of oak just coming in to the side. This is a young whiskey. It's a new distillery, already showing immense promise. A big fan of New Zealand whiskies in general, actually. Are really well worth watching out for. There's some great whiskies coming out of there. Cardrona really flying the flag at the moment. That little drop of water, it just softens it down. More citrus characters coming through. It's almost like orange, but orange pith and grapefruit pith coming in. Lovely and fresh on the finish. A little tingle of acidity, tiny little bit of spice. Beautiful balance already from a very young whiskey. So, New Zealand, what's New Zealand like climatically? Well, you know, you go to New Zealand, you feel very much at home. If you're Scottish, you know, it's just like, you know, it's like a younger Scotland. You know, it's got mountains and glens, except the mountains are a bit higher. Is the climate similar? Well, at Cardrona, and remember it's the southern hemisphere, you know, so the hottest months of the year, which is like February, March, the temperature is going to be hitting 40 degrees centigrade, so just a little bit warmer than Speyside. And that's during the day. In the evening, it can fall as low as 10 degrees. So huge difference between day and night temperature. July and August, which obviously there's a winter and summer hemisphere, the maximum you're going to get 5 degrees, the low -15. So real extreme fluctuations between day and night and winter and summer. And that's going to change the energy of the maturation cycle. And also, the humidity is varying all over the shop as well. Everything is just kind of moving in completely kind of bonkers directions. So the humidity is anything from 20% up to 100%. You know, so in Scotland, it's actually a relatively damp and quite humid climate. Cardrona can be really dry, or it can be really, really humid as well. The barrel mix in here, and the barrel mix kind of influenced by the climate? Well, what they wanted to do, and what the Just Hatched is a mix of sherry casks. So they're predominantly sherry, but 45% sherry cask, sherry butt, and some American oak in there as well. So it's about 30 or 36%, I think they said, of ex-bourbon, but also an absolute key to their longer-term strategy, Pinot Noir casks. So it's a local Pinot Noir, hopefully, ideally Felton Road, so Central Otagon, or Central Otagon Pinot Noir, amazing wines. They'll be using that, okay? So, and it's going to be kind of sherry and Pinot, which working together with the bourbon cask, kind of sitting there underneath as a base for the others to work on. I remember going there. I was there with my great friend Charlie McLean, the wonderful Michael Fraser Milne. I don't know if he's watching. It's very late, or for anybody in New Zealand watching at the moment. And Alex Bruce, the great Alex Bruce from Ardnamurchan. And the three of us went in there. We did an extensive barrel tasting. I think we tasted pretty much every cask in there. And speaking to Desiree and Ash and Sarah about that, and the feeling was that Desiree, the owner of the distillery, and she's saying, well, we want this to be a long maturing. We're not going to rush out to market because we think because of the climatic conditions, it's going to be a slower maturation cycle, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, boom, here it is, because it is moving a lot quicker than anybody anticipated. And that's the thing about new distilleries. You don't really know what's going to happen until you put it in the cask and see what happens. So what's happening there? The Angel share, roughly speaking, a little bit higher than Scotland, but it's about 3% rather than 2%. But something weird is happening at Cardrona. The sherry butts and the Pinot casks are dropping in strength, which is what happens in Scotland. The alcohol level begins to go down, whereas the bourbon casks are increasing in strength. That really doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Why is that happening? Why are things going in that way? The evaporation rate is, as I said, relatively low, relatively standard, but the cask activity, I mean, you're looking at this whiskey is a 3-year-old whiskey. The cask activity is incredibly high for a young whiskey. So what is happening? There's something very interesting climatically happening, which is adding to the Cardrona character. And this is, they reckon, and it's going to take time to actually work out all the science, that's the weird science that's going on here, but that vast difference between summer temperature and winter temperature, the difference between day temperature and night temperature, the humidity moving across the scale, that is pulling the whiskey in and out of the cask at a much faster rate than perhaps they originally anticipated, which means that policy of, well, we're going to have to wait for a long time because it's going to essentially stop maturing during the winter, it's actually been brought forward and actually changed because Cardrona is actually maturing at a quicker rate than perhaps was originally thought, but maturing in a significantly different way. The altitude also might have an impact because the higher up you are, the lower the boiling point is. And because of that, the energy within the cask being pulled in and out of the cask is going to change as well. So all of these factors, these natural factors, which are part of terroir, are impacting on flavour and producing, I think, in Cardrona, an absolutely awesome whiskey. So thanks, guys, for allowing us to show that there. I'm just going to check if there's any questions yet. There we go. There are a few. Yes, hey, Nick Kent. Excellent. Good to see you guys. Yeah. Do casks in Scotland undergo, oops, sorry, that just went. I don't know where. Undergo dormant maturation. I presume that means, do they ever stop completely? Is a question from Kevin. No, it doesn't ever stop completely. But if you want to maybe explain exactly what you mean by dormant distillation, I'll pick up on that in a second. I will get around to all the questions in a wee while. So we'll just kind of rattle through on our next one, but give all the whiskies their due. So we're going to stay in the Southern Hemisphere. Actually, we've got 3 whiskies here from the Southern Hemisphere sitting next to each other. And we're going to go along, or we're going to go west from New Zealand, not to Australia at the moment. We're going to all the way to South Africa. For our next whiskey number 3, is the Great Baines, which is the Cape Mountain grain from South Africa, from Wellington. So I'm speaking to Andy Watts, who's the distiller there at the James Cedric distillery in Wellington, which is kind of over the mountain from Cape Town, about Baines. and about the climatic conditions in South Africa, you know, where they're getting hot, dry summers, you know, where it's kind of 32 degrees, you know, very pleasant, you know, quite warm, especially for Scotland. And again, a big drop at night time. So you lose about 15 degrees from the peak in the day to the night. So about 15 degrees at night time. In the winter, it's much cooler, it's much wetter as well. Remember, the location is right down in the south of Africa, you know, so it can get actually really pretty cold. Kind of the hottest you're going to be getting is 19 and down to about 8 at night. So again, that kind of temperature being halved. The temperatures within the warehouses, Andy told me, are relatively stable. In the warehouse, it'll be about 24 degrees in the summertime and about 16 degrees in the wintertime. But again, very different to Scotland. Significantly warmer to Scotland, and it's quite high in humidity as well. And that kind of high humidity in a packed warehouse and a palletized warehouse, if you just lock the door of that warehouse and walk away for a while, then open it up to do some work in it, there's going to be a lot of alcohol in there. You know, the angels are just, rather than sitting on top, sucking the whiskey out of the roof, it's kind of, they're having a party within the warehouse itself. So I remember being in a warehouse in Canada, in Alberta, with my mates Lou Bryson and Davin de Kergamo, and we were absolutely hammered without actually having drunk anything because the alcohol fumes were so strong. Amazing. Slightly higher angel share now. So we've moved from 1% Glenfarclas to about 3% Cardrona, and we're moving up to about 5%, 4.5 to 5% a year. So more dynamic. So that's what you're expecting, slightly more rapid maturation taking place. This is a grain whiskey made from corn. Beautiful, beautiful dram. It's kind of double casked. So this has been aged for about 3 years in, well, not about 3 years, aged for 3 years in first fill American oak. So come across from bourbon, emptied of bourbon, obviously, shipped across to South Africa, filled with new make grain, kept for 3 years, taken out of those casks and put back into another set of first fill American oak casks for about between, roughly speaking, 2 years. It could be between 18 and 30 months until they hit exactly the right flavour. So sweet grain, corn character coming through, that kind of slight banana note, estery elements coming in, and also that big impact of vanilla, butterscotch, almost that kind of almost rummy element coming in. We're going to have a rum in a wee while. Gorgeous dram, big fan. Delicious, soft, rolling, really seductive grain whiskey. You know, you just get drawn into whiskies like this. Delicious. You know, you want to kind of pour it on ice cream. You want to put it in the fridge, put it in the freezer, chill it right down. Make it into cocktails. Wonderful, extended. This would be amazing with cold coconut water. Really start playing around with it. Lovely kind of orange tangerine, actually. Tangerine or mandarin character beginning to develop as well. So beautiful balance. Great whiskey maker, Andy Watts. What's the climate done to this? You know, so you've got the grain, you've got the American oak casks. Well, because of that climate being warmer, and the evaporation rate being higher, as we've noticed, you're going to get a slightly quicker extraction taking place. So you're going to get more of that impact of wood. And the wood impact is going to be stronger anyway because it's a first fill cask as well. But this is a more quicker maturing style of whiskey. And that applies across the range because they produce the 3 ships range down there as well. And what you find with the 3 ships is that certainly in like first fill casks like this, once you've got to about 7 or 8 years of age, the wood is beginning to take over. So what Andy is doing, you're beginning to, he's wanted to use refill casks for longer term maturation to kind of slow that down, for it's quite a dynamic maturation. You don't want the whiskey to be too woody. You don't want it to lose all that character that you've spent establishing back in your distillery as well. So there's a much more, what he was explaining is there's a much more kind of regular examination of the casks, which are going for special releases, small batches, finishing, etc., etc. They're going to be looked at on a much more regular basis because the evolution of the flavors is so much more dynamic, so much more rapid that it can quite easily tip. Boom, and you've lost it, and it's gone a bit woody, it's gone a bit dusty. The wood is taken over, and a lot of that great work has been done. So most of the whiskies that are coming out of James Sedgwick are between like 3 and 5 years old. Predominantly aged in ex-bourbon. There's some sherry and some finishing casks coming in, but predominantly ex-bourbon. But refill casks are playing an important part as well, especially if you wanted to extend that maturation. And that is in itself an interesting one. It's something that we're going to start picking up as we move along here, because what you're finding with people's assumption about whiskey, because Scotch whiskey has dominated the proceedings, and Scotch whiskey was bottled at, say, 10 years old or 12 years old, that has kind of become the standard, so that, and it's something which is applied, and wrongly applied, I would say, to all whiskey. Well, I mean, it takes 12 years old for Scotch to become good, which is simply not true. But if that is what the assumption is, and that's what people have been taught to believe, then they're going to apply that same rule to whiskies in South Africa or New Zealand or Australia or wherever. Whereas, in fact, because of the climatic conditions, the whiskey is going to mature more rapidly. It's going to hit that arc of maturation, or that arc of maturity at an earlier point. So therefore, a fully mature whiskey will be coming out of South Africa at 5 years old. And a fully mature whiskey might, you can do it in Scotland, but it's still going to be quicker in South Africa than it is going to be in Scotland. But because we've been brought up to believe that it has to have 2 digits to mean mature, I think what has happened, unfortunately, is that whiskies from climates which are warmer tend to be looked down on, or tend to be, well, yeah, it's just a young whiskey. But it's not, because the climatic conditions have dictated a different style of whiskey completely. So that is us in terms of South Africa. And we're going to kind of move east once more. And now we're going to be moving into Australia. And we're going to be moving to the fantastic Starward distillery, which is in Melbourne. And what we've got here is the Nova from Starward, and that's bottled at 41%. Starward, a fantastic distillery, and I think it's part of the new age of Australian whiskey, this kind of second phase that's taking place in Australia. What you found to begin with, what was the majority of distilleries that were opening up in Australia were, by necessity, probably relatively small, and making amazing whiskies, making great whiskies, but obviously in smaller volumes. Now you're beginning to see a second wave of distilleries, which are Archie Rose would be a good example, Chief Sun, also in Mornington Peninsula, and Starward, who are building bigger sites and actually beginning to establish themselves with greater levels of volume. Nothing wrong with volume. More people can drink the whiskey. That's a good thing, is it not? If you go to the Starward distillery, well, it's not necessarily the most beautiful distillery in the world. It's essentially just an extremely large shed, large hangar. The stills are there. The casks are there as well. In the summer, the heat is intense, and the casks are sitting relatively close to where the stills are, so it's going to be quite a hot place. That is going to affect the conditions within the warehouse, and the distillery are going to affect the style of the whiskey itself. Melbourne's climate is pretty extreme. Any of you who've been there, I don't know if anybody from Melbourne, I think Yao was on a call earlier, or a class earlier on. Hello to all my friends down in Melbourne. We're with you guys. Nice to see lockdown beginning to ease, and the whole peak coming out, and hopefully all the bars are going to be open, and people will be enjoying themselves in a socially responsible fashion, and you'll be able to make money again. So anyway, we're with you. So in terms of climate, well, it can get as hot as hell, you know. Peak in the summer can be hitting 40 degrees centigrade. But it can suddenly get really, really cold as well. So again, a very, very dynamic climatic condition as well. The highest temperature in terms of month-wise is usually February. So that is when it's going to be hitting about the 40s. And I was speaking to David Vitale about this earlier on. He said the highest that he could remember was 47. You know, and that's going to have an impact on human beings. It's certainly going to have an impact on the whiskey as well. It rarely gets down below zero. It can kind of hover round about there, but it doesn't go anywhere as deep as Cardrona does, which gets right down below zero. But you've got this real big extreme going over it, and it's a drier climate as well. Okay. And because it's a drier climate, what is happening within the barrels themselves and the casks themselves is that the alcohol level is rising rather than falling. Okay, so you put it in at the strength, and all of a sudden, boom, you're beginning to see alcohol levels rising as well. So this is a Nova, it's a single malt coming out. American oak barriques coming out here. Very, very juicy. On the palate, my goodness, you know, look at the strength of that. 41%, gorgeous, soft, juicy, juicy, juicy fruits, red fruits, really mouth-watering. Lovely kind of acidity coming in there as well. And this great kind of baking spice character coming in just on the back palate. Not too overloaded with vanilla, but you get that little kind of toffee element just coming through on the nose. Again, a young whiskey, but it's hit its maturity at an early stage. Does need that little drop of water, little hint of oak, almost kind of cedary element coming in, or is it this little kind of cedar cigar element, which you normally would expect with a whiskey, certainly Scotch whiskey, of much longer, that spent much longer in the cask. A beautiful balance between the two elements here. They're using almost exclusively, they're using wine barrels here in hoggies and barriques, losing about 3% a month in terms of the angel share. But as I said, the alcohol level is beginning to go up, and they're wanting an active cask, so they're wanting good impact from the wood itself. That's going to bring the whiskey over slightly quicker. The climate's going to bring the whiskey over slightly earlier as well. So that's the formula. You know, that is the way that you're going to be looking at the whiskey. And I think it's probably the appropriate time to now begin to apply kind of a little bit of wood science in here, because there's three things that are going to be happening when spirit is maturing in cask. They're called subtractive, additive, and interactive maturation. The subtractive maturation is new make character can be quite aggressive. You can get sulfur compounds, for example, coming through, slightly more kind of aggressive, just those higher alcohols, and slightly more aggressive. And the cask is going to calm that down. The cask is going to remove that, especially American oak casks. American oak casks with that layer of charcoal in there, the charcoal is going to absorb those heavy elements in there. It's essentially kind of a slow charcoal filtration that is happening within the cask itself. Also, just that act of breathing means that the aggression is going to be moving away as the cask is breathing, and it's going to evaporate off. At the same time, additive maturation is coming in, and that's where the compounds from the wood, the vanillin, the lactone, the dried fruit elements that you're going to get from sherry casks are beginning to be absorbed into the spirit. That's additive, and if you look at a whiskey which has just entered that kind of additive stage, you've kind of got the distillery character here, and you've got the wood coming in here, and it tastes nice, but it's not complete. It's a bit awkward. It's a bit, and I think you see that with some younger whiskies, especially from Scotland, in less active casks. They're still kind of finding where they are. They're kind of dancing around each other. Whereas the interactive phase is the most important element of it all, because that's when all the flavors from the wood, all the flavors from the spirit are meeting and integrating. And when they're integrating, they're creating new flavor compounds. You're building up complexity. And also you have the impact of air coming in. This is where the oxidation is also helping to create new flavors. So that interactive element is really, really important in maturation. My question to the guys, especially working in hotter climates, is, does that still happen? Or because whiskey is hitting its maturity at an earlier stage and getting woody at an earlier stage, are you getting just essentially subtractive stuff, lots of additive, but less interactive? Or are the three parts of that process simply speeded up? When I was speaking to David about this for the Starward, he was saying, well, the subtractive thing is less important for them as a distillery because they're making this very, very clean spirit. So they're not wanting to create any sulfury compounds. It's a sweet, clean spirit. So the subtractive element is less important. So you're not having to wait for that to disappear before you begin to see the additive elements coming through. And the additive element has much more of an impact, obviously, if you're using virgin oak or first fill wood, because the wood is still soaked up. It's still this reservoir of flavor in there. So you're getting much more of that coming in, giving greater dynamism by the climate itself. And the interactive element, well, that is the one where the environment is really going to be impacting a lot. That is where that's where the dynamic character is beginning to move in. That's where the air is coming in. That's where you're beginning to see that the push and the pull given by the air pressure and the temperature beginning to help to create all those tertiary flavors. And that is really, really important, that those three elements are still happening and still occurring in the cask. So it's not just an additive maturation. You do get that interactive element, but you have to be aware of that and not let the wood run away with the whiskey, especially. You know, as David said to me when we were having a chat, you know, it's really easy in these conditions to overcook the whiskey, you know, especially if you're using first fill casks. So you have to be watching it like a hawk. You have to understand those mechanisms, those cask mechanisms, to go, right, okay, that's enough of that. And we're seeing the integration and interaction happening, but it's beginning to race away and the cask is going to win out. Therefore, this is the right time to bottle it as well. And it also dictates the spirit itself. By knowing what the climatic conditions are, the spirit is going to be trying to match those climatic conditions. So it's going to be a softer, more gentle spirit because that suits the conditions and suits the environment. And interestingly, what Starward are doing now is actually aging some of their whiskey down at the McHenry distillery in Tasmania, where it's a much cooler climate, just to see what the effect different temperatures have on their maturing spirit. I'm thinking that is kind of similar in many ways to Mars Distillery, Mars Shinshu Distillery, which is maturing there. And it's Mars, a very high distillery, it's 800 meters. So it's actually got a relatively cool, slow maturation that's taking place up at Shinshu. But they're also aging right down south in Kagoshima, and even further south on the islands, right in the very south of Japan, where it's effectively subtropical. So they're aging in kind of two areas. And again, the flavors which are going to be produced are going to be different, and they're going to appear at different points in that arc of maturation. I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at a rum as well, and have a look at kind of tropical aging impacts on rum from the Caribbean. So our next glass here is from the wonderful, wonderful Foursquare Distillery in Barbados. So thanks to Richard Seal thanks to Whisky Exchange for giving us the samples. Thanks to Richard Seal for making it in the first place. This is the Dourley's 12-year-old, and this, Richard will be pleased to hear, the 43% version, which is absolutely kick-ass brilliant. Oh my goodness gracious me. Okay. Barbados. So what's the climate like in Barbados? It's pretty stable. The highest it's going to get is about 30 degrees. Nice. The coolest it's going to get is 28 degrees. Nice. Like that. And if you taste the rums are like the climate. Just whoa. Beautiful, balanced. Temperature, humidity, 70 to 80. Interestingly, it's quite windy, and the wind is actually helping to mature those rums. Those climatic conditions, not just the temperature, not just the humidity, but the warehousing at Foursquare is actually open-sided. The wind is allowed to be pushed through and pulled through, and that is also helping this dynamism that is what maturation is all about. Angel share, now we're beginning to creep up. This is the highest angel share we've seen so far. This is between 6% and 8%, also driven by all these conditions that are taking place. I asked Richard about casks and how to choose cask types, and he was just saying, "Well, I choose the best casks." You know, the whole important thing is you've got to choose good wood to begin with. That said, he's found that smaller casks, so like 200-litre casks, don't work as well as large casks. So hogshead size, 225-litre cask, barrique size, I beg your pardon, work better than those smaller casks. So that just kind of, you're easing back a little bit. That slightly larger cask kind of calms things down, allows slightly longer term maturation here as well. He did use, or has used, new wood. He found that pretty challenging, and you can understand why. You've got high angel share, you've got more rapid element of extraction in that additive stage, especially, and indeed that interactive phase as well. So the virgin oak tended to just kind of, overcook quite quickly. So he does prefer refill casks. And that kind of will go across the whole of the rum industry. In general, refill casks are preferred. It slows things down because everything is so dynamic. If you have slightly less activity from the cask, you're allowing a slightly more gentle, longer term maturation, rather than just kind of hammering it with wood very, very quickly. Okay. This is a blend of 12-year-old rums, so ex-bourbon and ex-Madeira casks. So you get that wonderful, wonderful kind of red and blue fruit characters coming through here. The ex-bourbons are a mix of first and second and indeed third fill casks, so some of these older casks coming in. So the first fill is going to give you the vanilla, the second and third fill, calmer, allowing the rum characters to come through. Madeira, all first fill, so that's why you're getting that red fruit character coming through. That great kind of banana character, the beautiful tropical fruit element coming in, the black fruits coming in from the Madeira, beautifully balanced. 12 years is a long time in cask in the Caribbean in those climatic conditions. That's why refill casks are important. That's why watching it like a hawk is absolutely phenomenal. Really great rum. Syrupy, lovely fresh citrus character coming in there. The fruit just expanding in the mouth. Lovely kind of toffee elements coming in, almost kind of treacly element coming in. You know, that little kind of kick of molasses just coming in towards the back there, and just a very, very gentle spice at the end, and lovely, very, very long, really, really ridiculously good finish as well. And again, what you're talking about, those three elements, those three mechanisms taking place, and those three mechanisms moving at a more rapid rate than they are, say, at that Glenfarclas. Remember back at that Glenfarclas? Oh my God, almost like 50 minutes ago, losing 1% a year, just kind of moving along, nice and steady, all right? Don't rush, plenty of time. Against Barbados, where things, boom, moving faster, moving faster. Choose your casks properly, understand your climatic conditions, because the climate is generating flavour in its own way. And you got to think about this in a kind of scientific way, that heat is a source of energy. This is something I was discussing with Richard, that look at heat as a source of energy that is speeding up those reactions. Maturation is a relatively slow process. So heat has a quite a marked effect on that process. It's to do with that energy. It's to do with that delivery of energy, driving things forward, driving in, driving it out of the cask, the wind helping, the temperature helping to be able to create those flavors. So the climate is a huge factor in driving flavor. It's not just this thing that people have to live with. It's something that you begin to understand as a rum maker, as a whiskey maker, and use to your advantage. You know what the downsides of it. You know that it potentially things can get woody too quickly. So therefore you find ways of coping with that. If you're in the complete opposite to this, if you are in Speyside, well, yeah, you can use some first fill casks, and you will get that generosity coming through at 10 or 12 years old. So it's not really, this is something that Richard was saying. He said, it's a mistake to think of it, I'll just quote him here, you know, it's a mistake to think of it as just tropical aging or continental aging or hot climate or cold climate. The heat and humidity, the movement of the air, those are the elements that you've got to be thinking of. Barbados, yes, I mean, compared to Scotland, it's high, but it's not the highest in the world. Humidity is high, but again, it's not the highest in the world. It's not nearly as humid as, say, Japan is in midsummer, where, you know, it's hellishly humid. So understanding conditions. I'm going to be talking about barley this afternoon with three distillers who have essentially become farmers, and looking at the conditions which help to create the flavour in their fields. But the conditions also exist in the warehouse as well. It is part of this thing called character. It is part of this thing, if you want to use the term terroir. And it's funny, you know, Don and I kind of put together all of these classes and discussions, and we didn't really think about a theme. And there was kind of a theme, but we kind of stepped back and had a look at all the classes, and they all seem to kind of form this jigsaw that we're talking about conditions, we're talking about barley, we're talking about land, we're talking about place, we're talking about all these different facets coming through as well. So I don't know, fortuitous perhaps. Well, we're working towards our final whiskey here, and our final whiskey is from Kavalan, from Taiwan, and this is Podium. So let's have a little discussion about Kavalan. So it's fairly obvious why I wanted to have Kavalan last. So now we're talking about climate here. Kavalan. It's at its hottest during June, between kind of June and September. It's kind of the hottest period, and the temperature goes from like 35 to 38. The coolest is going to be like September onwards. It's kind of goes between like 20 and 30, because you do get kind of, especially in the winter months, you get kind of huge blasts of cold air coming from Siberia coming down, so the temperature can drop, but only for very, very short periods. It is humid. It is humid all the year round, so up to about 95% humidity. So really humid climate, higher temperature range, higher angel share. Between 7 and 10% a year is being lost to those happy angels. You walk into Kavalan, shh, you have to be quiet, because you can hear the angels carousing above you. So much of that is evaporating off. I know we've often dwelled on Kavalan's port casks and wine casks and sherry casks, but actually the majority of the casks in there are American oak. And the reason that the majority of the casks in Kavalan are American oak is because you get much higher tannin from European oak sherry casks. And in that really dynamic aging, you're going to get more tannic whiskey coming through very, very quickly. very, very quickly. Also, they varied the size. So generally speaking, when we're thinking about American oak, we're talking about 200 litre casks or 225, maybe 250 litre casks. Kavalan, as Suntory also do, actually have American oak puncheons. Chichibu also have them as well. So it is going to be a mix. So maybe you've got smaller casks, but you also have those kind of puncheons coming through as well. And that, because of the size of the cask, is helping to kind of calm things down a little bit. And this whiskey, Podium, is going to be a mix of refill casks. So rather than the first fill of those smaller casks, with kind of barrel size, up to those 450 litre puncheons. But there's also a little touch of virgin oak in here as well. And that shows a real mastery. So Ian Chang, the great Ian Chang, has actually recently left Kavalan, but this is one of Ian's one. And I think this shows what a master blender he is, because using virgin oak in those sort of dynamic temperatures, wow, trying to achieve balance. A little bit in there, and you get that slight kind of piney element that's just coming through on the back. Just a lovely, lovely whiskey, and not too woody. For me, I think Podium. I like a lot of the Kavalan. I mean, I've always been a fan of Kavalan. I found some of the fortified wines casks slightly harder to take, to be perfectly honest, because you are getting more tannin, you get more extract, it's kind of boom, and it's kind of cask in charge rather than distillery character in charge. And I always want to, in single malt, I always want to try and find a distillery character, an identifiable distillery character. So they're fascinating whiskies, but the wood is kind of in charge. With this, I think you really begin to taste what Kavalan is all about, which is this wonderful kind of peachy, melon, floral character coming through. Yes, there's wood in it. You're always going to get wood in it. Yes, there's lovely vanillin coming through. There's more kind of lactone elements coming in there as well. But the balance is absolutely superb. Slightly syrupy, lovely kind of marmalade-y characters coming through, like Rose's. Remember Rose's tangerine marmalade? Oh, that's what I'm getting on the finish of that. And then just that little touch of vanilla finishing off in the end. I think this is just superb, superb balance. And that is the word. Balance is the word. Balance, all of these spirits have been beautifully balanced. And the reason they're all beautifully balanced is because the distillers understand distillery character, they understand how to make great spirit, but are understanding the conditions which exist within their warehouses to be able to produce a remarkable and balanced whiskey at the end of the day. So that's me. We've got maybe a few minutes just to kind of crack through. I did kind of ramble through rather than, I can only kind of do one thing at a time. I'm a man, I can't multitask. So let's kind of skim through some of these questions. Ingvar, hi Ingvar. He often looks for balance in a great whiskey. Is there better balance in a whiskey that's matured in a climate with little temperature changes? I think the nature of the balance is different. That's kind of what we were. He asked this a while back, rather than just a second ago. You do achieve balance, but you have to look at the balance in a different way, and you have to understand those conditions to be able to achieve that balance between the cask and the distillery character. So everything's moving slightly faster. You can do it, but you have to look at what type of cask you're using, whether you're using more refill cask to calm things down, how long, what the nature of that arc of maturation is going to be. I keep saying that term, and I haven't actually really necessarily explained it. So your arc of maturation is that you've got kind of an aggressive new make character at the beginning, and not a lot of wood in there. So you've got a huge amount of impact from the freshness of the spirit itself. But as a whiskey matures, so it kind of moves up through this arc, and this arc is the balance. So by the time you hit this kind of peak maturity here, the balance between the cask and the distillery character is absolutely perfect. You hit that kind of perfect equilibrium between that. So everything is an absolute beautiful balance there. Down there, you've got more distillery character and less cask. Here, everything's in balance. And then as you move on, so everything is going to begin to become slightly woody. It's going to be interesting whiskey, but this here, kind of this area here is where your window of opportunity is to hit that balance. And I think each cask is going to have a slightly different arc. So you're going to be moving over here very quickly if you're in a first fill cask. And if you're in a first fill cask in a very hot climate, you're going to go right over here very, very quickly indeed. So if you're in a refill cask, it's going to take longer to hit there. So understanding your conditions is really, really important. Lovely question. Thanks, Ingvar. And nice to hear from you again. Dormant maturation, continental interior climate, Kentucky, Tennessee. If temperature in cask falls below 4 degrees, the cask stops breathing, maturation ceases. Yeah, it's certainly, yes, yeah, I understand what you mean now. Everything just seems to shut down in Kentucky. Interesting one, that doesn't really happen in Scotland, as far as I know. The temperature in Scotland is actually fairly stable. You know, if you walk into a warehouse in Scotland in winter, it will be relatively warm. If you walk into it in summer, it will be relatively cool. The temperature level is actually pretty stable in Scotland. In a warehouse, it's usually about maybe 2 degrees. So no, you're not actually closing everything down. It's a great question. Thank you for that. Fill strength, yeah, I think it should. I think fill strength should be based on climate. I think fill strength is an area that Scotch whisky industry, I think it'd be quite interesting to look at, looking at lower, I was talking to Michters last night about their low filling strength. And when you add water to whiskey to put it into the cask, you do get a very interesting chemical reaction as well. So it does help to drive flavour forward. And I would like to see Scotch whiskies being put into cask, or experiments taking place of Scotch, putting in lower than 63.5. So that the addition of the water, that in itself is going to create flavour, but also the climatic conditions are going to impact on that as well. So yes, I think it will indeed have that. Nicola says, Alex Walker, hello Alex. Nicola, nice to see you again. Missing seeing you. I always see Nicola in Paris. We will always have Paris, Nicola. Try the hills outside Glasgow. Aye, indeed. Would it be, here's the question, here's the T question. Would it be true to say terroir comprises elements of maturation out with human control, temperature, humidity? Yes, of course it does. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that sounded very dismissive. Yes, terroir is the big picture. Terroir, I would argue, is also human influence. It's why I actually don't like using the term terroir for whiskey. Or if I am using it, whiskey terroir is different to wine terroir. And I think we've been trying to shoehorn wine terroir into whiskey. And I think it exists differently. But as a concept, it's big picture. It's everything. It's climate, it's condition, it's air pressure, it's temperature, it's humidity, it's soil, it's boom, everything. Is impacting on that, and I think hopefully that's what this tasting has shown, that you can't ignore what is happening. That this is a dynamic part of flavour creation. It's not just the wood; it's the conditions that the wood is sitting in, which is going to be helping to generate flavour at the end. And so, my dear friends, that's it. Thank you very much for joining me. This is my office, by the way. This is where I try to work on a regular basis. You can see there's trying to turn this around. There's some whiskey over there, some CDs over there. There's some decoy birds behind me. There's antlers growing out my head, and of course, well, there's rum over there, and a small selection of a slightly larger selection of vinyl, which I have as well. So welcome to my home. It's very nice to have had you here for the past hour. I'm going away. I'm going to have a wee bite of lunch, I think, and I am returning on stage. I think I might be speaking to Brendan McCarran this afternoon. If not, I'm definitely speaking about barley. So do come along to that. That is going to be on the main stage, I believe. Yeah, all about the barley from 4 o'clock until 5:15. So looking at this realization or this movement to re-establish whiskey as an agricultural product rather than industrial one. So that's going to be looking at conditions in a slightly different way. Okay, thanks a lot for coming, guys. Go safely. Enjoy the rest. See you later. Bye.